So with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker for today is Brym, Zach. And Zach is an assistant professor in the Department of Agronomy and is based here at the Tropical Research and Education Center, Homestead. He received his BS and his MS degree from the University of Michigan and a PhD from the Utah State University. In 2017, I had the privilege of hiring Zach as a faculty member here at TREC. Zach's research and extension programs span topics related to agroecology with a focus on plant diversity and management. Specifically, he and his team study how management of crops and plant diversity contributes to the sustainability of agroecosystems and food systems in the areas of crop introduction and ecology, agroecosystem diversity, and food system resilience. His research outcomes and extension programs promote sustainable plant management across agricultural and natural areas and develop new cropping systems that balance crop production, environmental conservation, and community development. Many of you online or here will recognize Zach as the face of hemp. He leads the UF IFAS-M program and was recently selected for a leadership role in the USDA NIFA Hatch multi-state hemp group. His extension contribution has been recognized, and he was awarded the UF IFAS Seymour Goldweber Extension Faculty Fellowship Award for his role in developing the hemp program at UF. Although still in the early stages of his career, he has already amassed a body of work reflecting the development of a program of agroecology, including publishing more than 25 peer-reviewed articles in several prestigious journals, such as Agricultural Water Management, Agronomy Journals, Biological Conservation, just to name a few. His external grants total more than 2.5 million from sources such as USDA Agricultural Research Services, Florida Department of Agricultural and Consumer Services, and industry sponsors. The title of Zach's presentation today is TREC Agroecology, Supporting Tropically Unique Plant Diversity, Productivity, and Community. And with that, please give a round of applause.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is an exciting opportunity for me to summarize a bunch of the work that we've been doing here at TREC with our agroecology initiatives. I'm going to do my best today not to use the word hemp at all. So I'm sorry if that disappoints some of you, but there's a whole bunch of other things that we've been up to that I get a chance to talk about today. So the folks in the room and here on the pictures, just to start with a thanks for TREC Agroecology. It really is a we that I get to speak on behalf of today. I won't have a chance to name everybody specifically, but by way of this, many thanks to those folks that have contributed to this work. So, of course, the burning question to jump right into is, what is agroecology? And I've spent the last few years really grappling with how to describe myself and this discipline clearly to a whole broad range of audiences. The reality is agroecology is a complex idea, and in many cases, it means something different for where you are in the world or what sort of place that you have in agroecology. But succinctly, based on literature review and a few sort of tries at doing this, we can boil agroecology down to farming systems that try to achieve these four things. The farming systems that are productive, biodiverse, resilient, and are doing so from the perspective of a system. So distinguishing natural areas from agricultural areas is that productivity, that intentional productivity is a distinction that's critically important in my mind. The agro is the production side of things. The agroecology, as it may be distinguished from agronomy or other agricultural sciences, is that intention to also include biodiversity. Having that productivity and biodiversity across a long term is where we get to those resilient systems that can rebound and take disasters or disturbance. And of course, as all of this is complex, as it's all connected and interrelated, that's where we get into the ag systems, the systems thinking that's critical to doing this sort of work in context. And that context, aside from the big words that I use, the context that really means simply the respect for place, plants, and people. So that's our take on agroecology, and doing so with respect for your agroecosystem. And so as I talk to people about agroecology, I really try to balance that conceptual, global, abstract idea with what is agroecology to very specifically what is that unique context that we're working to manage plants or land. And so this is kind of that conceptual diagram for what is an agroecosystem. This is the parts and components of at least one agroecosystem in abstract, and you can see that there's way more to see here than what you can just glance in a few seconds. And really digesting these complex agroecosystems is the work of the Agroecology Lab, specifically from the perspective of plant diversity. So most folks, when they're thinking about agriculture, they are focusing on a single crop or livestock or other sort of commodity. And that's critically important as agriculture has developed over the last few centuries to develop an efficient and productive system really takes that attention to a focal crop. Those focal crops tend to be grown in monocultures. That stand of a single species, a single variety, is the population level. As we get more complicated from a single individual crop to a population, then as I mentioned, the community layer, where we have many and multiple species of plants, from our perspective at TREC Agroecology, is sort of that critical intermediate for considering these complicated interactions between organisms and agricultural systems. As you add in the invertebrates, the vertebrates, the bacteria, the fungi, the people, then you really get into that ecosystem level where we start talking about landscapes and boundaries and the surrounding area around the management that we're doing in agricultural systems. So I just sort of walked through a single one of these diagrams, but in my mind, the agroecosystem is very much a dynamic system. That as you change your space and as you change your time, there's going to be various different interactions and boundaries and all sorts of the agriculture and ecology that goes on. I'm not supposed to wander past the door. Okay. Did I still? All right. And so the couple axes here that we have on these dynamic agroecosystems. On the one hand, we have the different focal areas. So the center column there, as I was showing you earlier, is the agriculture or rural focused segment of the agroecosystems. But an agroecosystem need not be in an agriculturally zoned land or in an agricultural region. There are certainly other areas where agroecology and agriculture can exist. And so on the left-hand side, that left-hand column, that's the panel that's nature-based. Nature is certainly a critical aspect of agroecology, and I'll get to some of that a little bit later, but you can imagine where nature and agriculture sort of collide as far as the boundary, and it's important to be considering those interactions as well. Perhaps the majority of people that I talk to through extension here in Miami and around the state of Florida are thinking about this more from the urban side of things, right? Folks that only have access to agriculture through the food that they eat or through their community parks. And all of these systems, sort of the argument or the goal for agroecology is to move from the top row where we're lacking healthy plants or lacking plants entirely, and moving down towards the bottom where we are continuing to make this world a greener place. More plants everywhere that are productive is kind of a way to think about agroecology as well. So it took us a while to sort of put these ideas into something that's practical and digestible, but this is a kind of a victory lap for me here from an extension perspective. This document introduces agroecology, uses some of these diagrams, gets a little bit more deeper into some of these critical ideas, the features of agroecology that can be put to practice for plant and land management. So happy to share this document afterwards. Otherwise, sort of, if you didn't get enough of introduction to agroecology, that would be the next place to go. Okay, so as I mentioned, so I wanted to quickly take this from a big think, what is agroecology, and the way that we think about science and education, to very specifically what it is that we're doing here at TREC. This is exciting for me to share this knowledge that we've gained as a lab over the last 6 years with some key products along the way. So these photographs here just kind of summarize the agroecology context for TREC. You can see from the land use map there on the upper left-hand corner, this is particularly a diverse county, various different land uses, various different agriculture. Cut to the chase, this map doesn't even get it right. There's a tomato in one area and there's an avocado tree in another area, but it might be a snap bean or it might be a mango. You know, the land use as it relates to orchards and row crop is pretty well, but the satellites that are developing these maps for the USDA aren't temporally or spatially accurate. Of course, that next one is a satellite image of TREC. That's our quarter square mile, 160 acres at the research station. And you'll see this satellite image come up a couple more times as we're describing some of the plant diversity research that we've been doing. By and large, for someone that's come down here to Miami-Dade with the charge of working out what might be sustainable agriculture in the area, there are a couple things that really get in our way. For one, this profile here that some folks fondly call soil is really just rock at the surface, highly calcareous rock with a pH of something like 8 to 8.5 in various different ways. And so in order to do agriculture here, we have to take that rock in the upland habitats and literally crush it up. The locals call it rock plowing. It's kind of like a bulldozer that scrapes off a couple centimeters at a time. Most folks are irrigating from the wells that are drilled on site and distributing that water as our ground table is very close. And of course, a couple different ways to describe the natural areas and the ag systems that we'll get to shortly. So here at TREC, one of the super exciting things about my job is just this hyper diversity of land use, both at the research station and across the county. So these arrows here just kind of show on the map some of the different places that we've been focusing on as agroecosystems in our work. So of course, we have well-established and cultivated areas over several decades that many row crops that are produced in the winter and some across the summer. The tropical fruits, many diversity collections here at the station, and many examples of commercial operations as well. Where we're sitting in this southeastern most block, it's part of our ornamental collection. We have a whole diversity of landscape plants that have been established through the years as well. These we call our ornamental collection or TREC aesthetics. And then all the way on the other side, on the east, that southwest corner, is a conservation area. Something that is somewhat unique to the research stations at UF IPIS. This is a 10-acre set aside. It is pine, rockland, and hardwood hammock, common natural areas here in Miami-Dade County. And those areas require management just like the agriculture. And so as we start understanding our plants, as we start understanding management of the land, there really ought to be a cohesive and coherent strategy for combining the landscape and the ornamentals with the agriculture and the nature, just like I showed the dynamics of the agroecosystems between nature, agriculture, and the urban. And so one of the studies that a recent graduate student, Daniel here, helped me work up, really sort of took a mesocosm approach to habitats at TREC. So we picked a couple of small plots of land. These were 400 square meter plots. Here I am, the agroecologist, speaking for the trees at the same time as I'm busting up the ground for my experiments. So back in 2018, we had a chance to identify a couple of the old agricultural plots. These are the Northwest and the Northeast row crop areas that have been cultivated for several decades, with some newly cultivated, newly rock plowed areas that we call new ag in some of the areas of the station that remained as lawn. And so what we did was we did a couple experiments on these model agroecosystems, and some of these plants here were focal to those cover crop experiments where we did both monoculture and mixtures. The crops here on the left, Crotalaria junciae, also known as sun hemp, not related in any way to cannabis hemp. In the middle is called commonly Sudex grass. It is sorghum Sudan grass hybrid, and it ought to be sterile. That's one of the things that we expect for this cover crop in South Florida. However, we found some seeds and some plant material that's arrived in our program that isn't sterile. So an interesting nuance to this. And this one, this bad boy here, the Mucuna pruriens, was something that we tried. Another vining legume had been used in cover crop experiments previously in the area, but it turns out that there's a critical choice for the variety that you use. Most of the Mucuna pruriens that we have access to has hairs, which is responsible for the most itchy and long-standing itchy experience that you've ever had. And I would never recommend Mucuna pruriens for folks to put into their systems, like some that we've seen in food forests that we work with. But also it happens to be on that nasty list of invasive species. So we try to do some things that are a little bit uncomfortable here in TREC agroecology. I don't ever recommend anyone to take a mature seed of Mucuria pernians and like wave it over their head. That would be the worst possible week that you can experience. Okay, joking aside and introductions of these plants aside, I just wanted to share a brief moment about the soil test that we were able to collect. And so this is a % organic matter that was collected both before these studies and after the cover crop studies. And what you can see just visually is that pretty much ubiquitously across these cover crop species and these agroecosystems, cover crops increase organic matter, right? That's one of those key reasons why folks plant cover crops. Maybe we don't get as much of a benefit from the cover crops long term, given the hot and humid tropical summers that'll cook off these plant organic matter. But even so, as we were able to generate these cover crop trials and otherwise minimize the disturbance of this land, you can see that we're at least bringing those numbers up from pre to post. You also might notice just the difference in value of organic matter between the old ag, something between 6 and 7, and the new ag, something between 15 and 17. I just want to make one more caveat about these numbers. This soil is 45% gravel. Okay, so anybody who's done a soil test before knows that the first thing you do before you send your soil into the lab for an analysis is sieve out all the material greater than 2 millimeters. Okay, 45% of the material is greater than 2 millimeters. So when I present these numbers, you can sort of almost half the organic matter if you wanted to include the full volume of the soil that was tested. So just to kind of follow up with a research study that was published based on some of this work, previous master's students LaRue Storissant, and Stacy Swartz. They worked on a litter decay study, which is a common thing for cover crop residues. And what you can see just from the shape of these decay curves is that it happens really fast. So the organic matter, somewhere between half of the carbon leaves the system and the litter over the first week. Okay, the nitrogen is something between 70 and 80% in the first week. So, hey, let's grow cover crops for the organic matter. Well, maybe, how are we going to keep it in the soil? How are we going to keep it in the system? Has to be a critical aspect of this. If someone's like, I'm growing this legume for nitrogen, you might kind of scratch your chin about what the timing of the nitrogen is that they expect to get from the system. Thanks to collaboration with Ashley Smith and her team as well early on, we had some gas exchange collars that we put in these systems as well. And we were able to show that there's extra breath from the perspective of carbon dioxide in the converted soils, the soils with more organic matter than the old cultivated soils, the ones with less organic matter. So this isn't exactly a surprising result. But what is surprising to me is what we found when we returned to these plots after 2.5 years of fallow. So plots with high organic matter that had also higher respiration after leaving them in cover crops and fallow still maintained the higher organic matter. So that was really exciting for us to see. There's a common understanding that you sort of disrupt the soil, you make the land into agriculture, you lose a whole bunch of things. But a lot of the work that we do in agroecology is wondering what's the potential to maintain health in these systems? What's the potential to restore health back to these systems? And so doing this work here at TREC is adds some hope to the opportunity for restoring ag land to biodiverse and carbon sinks. Okay, how am I doing? I'm going to take a deep breath and a step here. So now with this general idea of the agroecosystems at TREC, the habitats that we're working with, we took these sorts of studies to the next level, something that I'm really excited about as a plant ecologist, to the plant diversity that we see at the Tropical Research and Education Center. And so one of the core competencies of the lab, along with Dr. Cliff Martin, is to go out and look at habitats across the station and across the ag and natural areas of the county. These are just some of the examples of places that were visited during one of our sampling activities across the county. Now, at least for TREC, which is what I'm trying to focus on here, we have just surpassed the 800 species mark. Cliff's going to correct me here. We're kind of up towards 814, 800. Okay, good. I got it right. All right. So the number's even growing currently. But this is a very exciting milestone for us in 2022 and 2023 to take the plant list here at TREC over the 800 mark. So let me say that in a little bit different way. We have a 1/4 square mile of TREC. Tallying all of the unique plant species at TREC gets us better than 800 plant species. Okay, I think that's super cool. How is that super cool? Well, one of the ways is the understanding that we break down those plants into their origin and the requirement of whether or not they need us, they need cultivation. So the plants that are native in Florida are 281. The non-native plants, but plants that have established, right, they don't need our help in order to maintain, that's 272. And then the non-native, not established, those are the ones that are here that only exist because we give them something. We give them a container, or we give them some fertilizer, or we irrigate them. And so the list roughly breaks down by thirds. But again, another feature of excitement, I want to return back to the native plants, and you'll hear me do this over and over again. Respect for the native plants here, that there are 31 endemic and imperiled on our list. So our pine rockland and our diversity collections include a critically endemic and globally unique set of plants. So the pine rocklands that are here in our area are globally unique. And so the plants that exist in our pine rockland are globally unique. And so the 31 that are here that exist in our station are very much a value to having this conservation land. And of course, I'll make a pitch for our program where knowing these plants, knowing where they are, having a chance to help them out is critical. Now, just to make one more set of detail that describes the biodiversity hotspot that is our research station, that number 281 is about 11 to 12% of all native plants described for Florida. So we have a quarter square mile of TREC that represents better than 10% of all native plants that have been described for the state of Florida. So I think that's very exciting and critical value for what we got going on here at the research station. Just to give a little bit more information about what those plants are and how they're distributed. Of course, the grasses are very much common plant family here, as well as the legumes and the palms. You know, as you're thinking about what makes up this big number, there's a few plant families that are certainly more prevalent here than others. So I just want to recognize the collections that we curate here at TREC. I mentioned them in passing, but just to say that as a lab, these are also critical resources for the work that we do. When we're actively curating collections and the aesthetics and the ornamentals, the nature and the natives, there's more folks than us doing the tropical fruits, of course, and the row crops. We're also tracking very closely the weeds and the invasives. And I'll get to a little bit later on the work that we're doing at Agroeco Park. Back to Daniel's thesis and the work that we're doing to list plants by habitat and how are these plant lists indicative of those different agroecosystems. We went out and used a well-established sampling protocol from the National Ecological Observatory Network. So this is a nested grid of 8 1-meter quadrats, 8 10-meter quadrats, and 4 100-meter quadrats in that 400 square meter square. And so it takes Cliff and Daniel about a day to go through all of that and make a list of all of the plants that they find. And we've collected that information both qualitatively and quantitatively. What I wanted to say is sort of a takeaway message from this work, there really are localized richness hotspots, particularly in ag systems, where kind of a small area in the ag has a similar number of species to a little bit larger area in the lawn. So you can imagine sort of all the species that you might find found in a smaller area, whereas it takes a little bit more space and diversity, heterogeneity in plant diversity in those lawns. I've mentioned a number of different ways that we're tracking diversity, and these genus here, Phyla, Bidens, Stylosanthes, and Stachytarpeta, are examples of us doing the surveys and finding good candidates for ground cover, or good candidates for taking the species that we're finding that require some of our help for conservation, or could be helpful to our efforts in agriculture. And then the takeaway message here is that ag history is a distinguishing feature, of course, right? I've shown that the organic matter is different. I've shown a number of different visual situations between the systems, but we are able to do that quantitatively. This is the big data slide that I'm going to show you today. The statistics, the Permanova, if the F statistic is higher, then it means that the plot or the site, that feature that we have in the model, is more dissimilar. Okay, so the bigger the number, the greater the differences are. And so you can see that we have kind of differences across our ag and our lawn plots, the difference between the circles and the triangles, and perhaps more importantly, the difference between sites. So that plot level, the ag versus the lawn, as I've already mentioned, is where those plant list differences or the plant communities are more different. These ovals here on this graphic, the ellipses, are useful statistically as well. So if a oval, which groups the plots, are overlapping, then you assume that they're not statistically distinguishable. But if they are distinguished in space, then we have consistently different plant communities. Okay, so what do you see from this figure? You see that the ag sites are critically different from the lawn sites. Maybe there's a little overlap in the lawn sites here. So this was 2020, just 2 years after we did our rock plowing. But then as we left those plots of land fallow, we saw a creep from those hardwood hammock and old collection, those new ag sites pushed closer to the lawn. So another example where we can, in effect, generate some restoration in ag land. If we let it be, if we ensure that the organic matter is consistent and the plant diversity has a chance to operate. Okay, so that's enough excitement perhaps for what we have going on here in terms of plant diversity at TREC. I also wanted to make mention for Miami-Dade County more broadly and take that opportunity to describe a little bit more the natural areas that we have here in the county. So the upland zone, the Ulithic limestone that is somewhere a meter or two above sea level. These are pine rocklands. Again, a globally unique habitat to South Florida and the Caribbean. And this graphic here from a paper in 2018 is very illustrative of the trouble that we have for natural areas conservation in the county. So the historic range of pine rockland outside of the Everglades, this is the Everglades, is drawn by these orange boundaries with some of those blue dots there that are the current range of pine rockland fragments. So the number that folks talk about these days is that there is less than 2% of pine rockland outside of the Everglades as it relates to its historic range. We don't have much left. We hardly have any left. And so a key aspect of our conservation efforts at TREC Agroecology are trying to integrate some of the agro part with the natural conservation. So I mentioned here again, kind of what's going on with the land use and the land cover. And just to cut to the chase, the reds here and the grays here, that's all the urban zone, right? More and more urban zone. And so just as agriculture is kind of squashed between nature and the urban, there's got to be a way that we can think about coexisting, particularly when it comes to conservation of natural and agricultural land. And so just to show a picture of a bunch of Cliff's favorite plants here, just wanted to sort of pose the idea that we should be able to learn from nature as we observe it in its state, as we begin to understand how managing nature in this area is critical, and the plants that we see in nature, and think about ways that we can move nature into ag and maybe even ag into urban Miami-Dade County. So these are sort of driving objectives for the lab as we move forward into our next phase of exploration. Okay, so with the last few minutes of my talk here, I wanted to describe a little bit about how we do agroecology. This is sort of in the perspective of the management of plants and land as it relates to our growing knowledge of plant diversity in the area. And so it really boils down to a design workshop, an opportunity to get to know your agroecosystem in a little bit more detail. That's the mapping your agroecosystem. Step one, get to know your place, your plants, and your people, right? Draw a couple pictures, make a couple lists. By doing that, invariably folks come up with unique and interesting connections, linkages, and knowledge that they have had intuitively about their system, but by drawing it out and writing it out, it really builds out that strategic plan. And so that next step is the adding the layer of planning into our knowledge of our agroecosystems, doing so intentionally so that when we take action, we can emphasize these goals that are critical for agroecology. So I mentioned those core principles of agroecology, and the way that we frame them also in this design workshop are the goals for agroecology. We can't do all of these things at once, but we ought to be doing all of them in some manner, as sort of my argument to you. that the production, of course, is critically efficient in modern agriculture, and we need to be continuing that in order to feed the world. However, there's also that aspect of diversity that we've lost in the industrialization of agriculture. And so returning to some of that investment in diversity, in some cases even prioritizing that diversity, I think is a critical area for agroecology to be involved. And of course, as you work through that, what's the long-term implications for your management choices with relation to resilience? Knock on wood, we haven't had a big storm come through and knock over trees lately, but it certainly happens. I think the kind of hardest part of the year is that late winter drought. Have you ever folks noticed that? So many plants have a hard time dealing with that seasonal drought after the rains kind of come back a little bit in the winter, but then they go away for 2 to 3 weeks before the rains come back. And if you haven't got a plan for resilience at that time of year, it's really going to pose some problems for your management. So as we're thinking through those agroecosystems and we're thinking through the goals of agroecology, the extension program of Agroecology Lab has come together as a community design workshop. And we had a chance to do that recently at Agroeco Park grand opening. The fenced-in area in Block 6 is now formally declared Agroeco Park. The fence was originally developed for our hemp trials back in 2019, and very quickly we realized that that wasn't going to be a great spot for agronomy for 2 reasons. One, there was a trench in the ground every 14 feet or so, and so trying to do a row crop study where the ground is at a different height of depth is very challenging for reducing variance in your statistics. But also there's this thing about pollination for cannabis, and so we had to separate different crop types into various different corners of the station. So this 3-acre plot of land just kind of sat. And I did so a little bit intentionally because along that fallow period, this land was transitioning to organic. So it's made it through that 3 years. The last synthetic fertilizer was 2019, at least a decade since where the last pesticide or synthetic chemical was applied. And so we have this 3-acre area for which I invited a bunch of local experts to help me in the lab develop a design, that 5-year plan for where we should be putting plants, how we should be balancing our goals of production, diversity, and resilience. And so just to give you a little bit better idea of where we are with Agroeco Park currently, we have them broken up into zones. And so that southern zone, the zone on the bottom, that's a crop rotation zone. We're primarily executing our best practices for cover crop rotations. Again, the ability to develop organic matter, the ability to manage weeds, and perhaps more specifically, what it takes from an equipment and management perspective in order to keep those systems productive. We'll get vegetables in there sometime, we'll get hemp in there sometime, but all in all, that's sort of that row crop system in Agroeco Park. The northern side is our orchard. Some folks early on wanted me to call it a food forest. I'm not sure that I really like that term. It's certainly used commonly in farm to school programs these days at the kids' school. It's kind of more like a food savanna or a food prairie right now. So, you know, the canopy hasn't quite closed. Anyways, we can debate the definition of forest sometime. That goes back to some of my work at Michigan. Anyways, kind of figuring out what plants go where and at what timing was the critical question for our design workshop. In addition, we have various different sources of organic matter, piles of compost and manure that we've collected from groups in the area, and a collaboration with Miami-Dade Extension that I'd like to recognize, a planned apiary for Agroeco Park. And so bees aren't allowed on county properties, as they say, and so we've been able to agree to host the beekeepers of the extension group here. And so one of the ways that plants are related to our apiary is that instead of just having boxes in an open place that we expect to have people around, we've planted both native and Florida-friendly plants that'll grow up as a flyaway barrier. And so the bees then will fly up and out as opposed to right into the traffic. That's a soil pit there. I've shown you and talked to you about that in a couple of different ways. So as we are working to manage Agroeco Park as an example of a productive and biodiverse and resilient agroecosystem, we're also working to be stewards of our natural area. As I mentioned, this is an area that requires management, specifically fire. So pine rocklands require fire in a timing of somewhere between 3 to 10 years if you want to maintain a quality pine rockland. What happens if there isn't fire? If there isn't fire, the hardwoods and the invasives come in and it transforms from a pine rockland to a hardwood hammock. And so we have both of those systems here at TREC, which is exciting for us to monitor and manage. But the core pine rockland that we have has been acknowledged as a high quality pine rockland as long as we maintain it. And so that's another pitch for the value of the lab and the work that we're doing, that someone's got to be here at the station caring for our space. Okay. So if you're like, that sounds all well and good, but I'm not really sure why you're here today, I did want to add a little bit of the context for why agroecology. Why is it that I'm here talking about plant diversity and the way that we do agroecology here at the station? I've hinted at this a little bit, but for me, starting with the positive, nature feeds our soul, right? Not just from the recreational side of things, but the access to clean water, the distribution of pollinators, the carbon sequestration and resilience. There are all sorts of things that we get from nature best. And by losing nature, by sort of compromising nature for other sorts of land uses, perhaps we're drawing away from a bit that feeds us. And so I mentioned this a couple different ways. Nature is disappearing, and as that's happening, there's sort of a critical need for transformative approaches like agroecology. Notwithstanding, agriculture in the county is disappearing. There's an updated report that'll come out here in the next while from folks out of the research station. Dr. Evans and others came forward with an assessment for agriculture, but by and large, the acreage is going down, and the value of crops outside of the ornamentals seems to be going down pretty significantly as well. And at the end of the day, if we're stewards of our land and we're stewards of our community, we also have to be caring for all these people. Almost 8 billion people in the globe. It's possible that since September, we've moved past that 8 billion mark. It's a huge milestone. There are a lot of people down here in South Florida too. Don't know if you noticed, but certainly getting the people back to the land, helping us with the management, educating them in order to be prepared to take on those careers, giving them an economy in order to do that work for nature, for our places is a critical motivation for agroecology. So with all that, is agroecology to the rescue? I won't make such grandiose statements, but certainly it's one of the things that keeps us excited and keeps us working hard to do all of this work. Now, saying so in a little bit more pragmatic way, there are certainly opportunities for agroecology here at TREC, in South Florida, in the county, and more broadly. And perhaps if I did a good job with today's seminar, then perhaps you understand how there's an opportunity for you as well. And so just again, kind of thanking the team in another different picture. Folks have been involved in a number of different ways. We're happy to show you around. Come and say hi. We'll show you Agroeco Park, take you on a nature walk. We like to do those things a little bit more frequently, and we certainly welcome you to come and talk to us about any of these things. One of the things that will drive the ability to do Agroeco Park effectively is volunteers, both from the extension side and the student side. Can we get master gardeners to volunteer in the area? Is there going to be a community garden? Are there going to be educational events? Yes, but it's going to take that community. And currently we wonder kind of what size of a community is going to come out from TREC to help us out. With that, there's all manner of activities going on. Agroecology Lab Online, the scaling up of these workshops into community gardens and Florida-friendly landscapes and municipal farm parks, all sorts of things. Is going to take a cadre of educational assistants and eventually land managers to do this work. And so the training that happens here at TREC Agroecology relates to some of that work. Others have come along with the summer research assistantships as well. So anybody can sort of have an opportunity to interact with us. We'd like to give some folks some opportunity to develop positions in the lab. But at the end of the day, we're welcoming to folks to join Agroecology Lab online and to reach out to us if you're interested to help us with the stewardship efforts that we have here at the research station. So with that, I'll say thank you. This QR code will help you get to some of that information about agroecology if you're interested. And otherwise, I think I've given myself some time for additional questions. Thank you very much, everybody.
Good presentation. I have a question. What is the attraction of the Agroeco Park? What is there? What do you want to accomplish by that?
What do I want to accomplish with Agroeco Park?
Yes.
We're having a lab meeting next Thursday after next to figure that out. The most basic reason why Agroeco Park is to give folks a chance, one, to access an agricultural system, one that might be a little bit more accessible than a commercial farm, or one that might have a little bit more complexity to see the features of the way that I think about agroecology, right? There's a row crop right next to an orchard, right next to an apiary, for example. We might have a community garden in there sometime as well. The other is to sort of motivate this community design. So Agroeco Park is not just my personal goals, but those folks that came to the grand opening had a chance to sort of preface, well, are we here for productivity? Are we here for biodiversity? Are we here for resilience? And of course, it's more complicated than just yes or no. It's like, how do we slice the pie of a 3-acre plot in order to do all these things? And so we get to walk through some of that design. Perhaps pragmatically, there wasn't really a great zone at TREC to do organic trials that had that organic transition through and through. And so you can see a number of the different ways that I'm kind of taking advantage of that site here at the research station.
The 802 species you guys recorded in the TREC area.
Yep.
Are they confirmed or just those species were confirmed by somebody?
So yes, in many cases there was maybe 30 of them that were listed as unknown or uncertain.
40.
Okay, so I got the number wrong. So there were 40 on the list. So those are ones that might be down to a couple species that we need to decide between, or some of them haven't flowered yet to give us enough information in order to get to that level of detail. Any of the plants that we have access to the parts of the plant that we can identify and collect into an herbarium specimen. We've also sent to the Natural History Museum, the Florida Herbarium up in Gainesville. And so many of our it might be this or it might be that, we've gained the assistance from the botanists at the museum to help us. So Cliff is way more meticulous than I am. And so his list, I would say yes, confirmed. But for those 40 that remain a bit uncertain.
Do you have a published list?
Yes, we do. It is available through that EDIS document. I can share with you the list, or I can share with you the document. It's publicly available online as one of our digital records.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. It was really good. I was actually wondering where hemp appeared in this in the story.
Well, I mentioned hemp a couple of times when the fence was built at Agroeco Park, right? So that was there, and we have it in our rotations as well. The way that I think about hemp these days, I make a kind of a joke about it. I call it a gateway crop. right? A whole bunch of people reach out to me. They're like, I want to be a farmer. I want to grow cannabis. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about this. And then in many of those instances, they start getting a handle on what it would take to do hemp. And they're like, well, maybe there's a better choice, right? Maybe there's a better choice that we've had a chance to experience at Agroeco Park or through our other programs. The type of research that we're trying to accomplish through our cover crop studies and through our other agroecological management is now sort of being integrated with the hemp research that we do. And so now that we have the equipment and the cover crop rotations that have been sort of developed into management practice, we're going to try to take some of the hemp nutrient management trials and let's say replace some of the nitrogen or the nutrient requirements by growing cover crops in rotation with the hemp. And so sort of steering the ship from all things hemp agronomy, hemp agroecology, where the arrow points exclusively towards agroecology has been kind of my professional challenge over the last couple of years. Thank you. Really?
Yeah, I am very intrigued about the story of that 1/4 mile piece of farmlands. Why?
TREC is a 1/4 square mile.
Okay, so the small one. How the endemics were able to stay in that area? What happened that were not touched or taken away?
Yeah.
And the second one is that if you or any of your lab members have been intrigued about the indigenous knowledge in agroecology, because I know many people working in the Amazon or tropical places, they have been using that knowledge, but I don't know what is the situation in the area.
Absolutely. So to answer your question about the endemics in the pine rockland, there has been various faculty that have sort of taken on the role of steward of that plot over the last several decades. Bruce Schaefer prior to me. And there's sort of a mix of leave it alone. Now, when I recall vividly driving around my interview with Gillies, like, we just leave that alone. That's a natural area. We don't do much in there. And it took me a little while to be like, can I even walk in there? And now here we are taking responsibility to manage it, place and trails. So there's some of that, just like we have left it alone and that's what remains. But there's also a couple key areas where pines have been re-added or pines have been planted into the space, or some other plants that are in collections from our colleagues around the county. We've got this rare plant, if you'd like to put it in your rockland, yeah, let's give it a try. And so there's a lot of exchange in that way as well. One of the things that I meant to do with this presentation that you've reminded me I missed was we have historic photographs that we have digitized as well from the collections here at TREC. And some of those photographs show the pine rockland of TREC was nearly its entirety. So 160 acres of pine rockland at TREC, now it remains as 10. And so keeping that 10 is sort of our critical responsibility here. The one of traditional knowledge is one that I take pause to clearly for two reasons. One, I think it's a critical aspect to the work that we do. We have to learn from the folks that came before us, and we have to learn from the history of our place and our people. There's a challenge to doing that here, and there's also the sensitivity of being the white dude from the north that's like, come on, give us your knowledge, and I'll do the same. So lacking that sort of meaningful introduction and period where we get to know each other before I come with my program and say, do it my way, is sort of the piece that I'm lacking. So as that opportunity becomes available to me, I'll jump right in to try to learn from indigenous folks in the area. I haven't yet been given that opportunity to be introduced in a kind of meaningful way. Someone else had her hand raised before Vincent. No? Okay.
Okay,
Go ahead, Vincent.
thank you, Brym, for your presentation. My question is, if I was paying attention in the first slides, you showed that agroecology or the ecosystem consists of plants and animals and invertebrates. So are there any plans to characterize some of the animals and invertebrates that we have here in TREC? Because I've seen like some rabbits and, you know, some snakes in the area where we have the pine grove.
Great question. I have a couple of different ways to answer that. One is just to acknowledge Dr. Martin, and as much as he's a botanist for our lab, he's systematics, entomology, lizards, snakes, all sorts of snails, all sorts of things. So the meticulousness that goes along with looking at an organism and figuring out what it is, he's your guy. He's our guy. And we have done the plants we've done with deliberate intent. The other taxonomic groups we've done in a couple different ways. One of my favorite examples is birds of prey and other sorts of predators that are invertebrates. I think that's a really great indicator of an agroecosystem's health, right? If a predator can persist in this sort of system, then there's something special going on. And so we've seen birds of prey diving into our cover crops recently. Very exciting to see those falcons and red-shouldered hawks. The snakes, certainly, you can bring them into Cliff, or he'll bring them to you when he finds them. There has never been a graduate student that's been startled by the surprising presence of a snake or a lizard in our lab. The invertebrates, the arthropods is another interesting example. Matt Quinowden, Jonathan Crane, and Daniel Carrillo and I, a few years ago, did a invertebrate survey across the mango groves. And so we found that there were relatively few apis. The honeybees weren't really there. It was more a diversity of flies. And the expectation was that those flies were doing the pollination more than the honeybees. And so we've done a couple different things to try and have native wildflowers in the mangoes and the orchards. So there are pieces of that. I would invite others in the room if you're interested in collecting lists and doing some of that for TREC. One of the tools that we use is called iNaturalist. And so we're working on building an iNaturalist list, and iNaturalist is taxon broad. So we have our plant list that we're generating and putting pictures into iNaturalist, but also we can have any sort of sightings at TREC that we'd like to add into the collection. So very good question. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So earlier you shared a slide of the organic matter and how it's like slowly increasing. So how do you plan to retain the increase in organic matter? Especially here, typically what happens is like when you're growing and you're growing at the rate that we grow, you tend to lose more than you put in.
I think you're exactly right. And therein lies that trade-off that is the critical discussion for agroecology. So we're able to maintain that organic matter in that example because we're not doing much else with it, right? Organic matter is a resource that you'll draw down as you work to grow plants in. I have become a bit more involved in some of the climate smart or carbon sequestration space as well. And it's very interesting hearing land managers sort of ask for the, can we do all the things? I want to produce a whole bunch of plants, sell my plants, and keep carbon in the soil. And just to your comment, I think I'm hesitant to that. So we kind of have to choose. What's this plot of land for? Is it for carbon, for organic matter, for conservation, the biodiversity aspects of that as well, and other ecosystem services, or is it for productivity? And then how can we sort of diffuse the boundaries where we're doing a little bit of both in all of our area? So thank you, great question.
Any more questions, comments online?
Oh yeah, sure. Is anybody online wants to ask a question?
Huh?
No question.
No questions?
Lots of comments, no questions.
Okay,
All right.
now you got your light on.
Well, if there are no more questions, let me again, thank Zach for enlightening talk and sharing his knowledge with us. As you know, one of the things that we do here at TREC, and we take a holistic approach. That's what we are trying to push, so that we can promote more sustainable agricultural practices and management practices so that we can bring our agriculture to become more compatible with our natural ecosystem. And so it all fits in. We are not just doing it out on a limb. That's what we do. So thank you again for sharing.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks.